Hello, hello. Welcome to Vonage Gems, the bi-weekly Ruby, all things Ruby, gemtastic show of Vonage Developer Relations team. My name is Ben Greenberg, and I'm the Vonage Ruby Developer Advocate, amongst other things. And today, we are kicking off a three-part series that we call Meet The Vonage Rubyists. And we're kicking it off with the one and only, the fantastic, the spectacular, the amazing Benjamin Aronov, who is from the Vonage community team and is one of the amazing Vonage Rubyists on our platform developer experience team. I am so excited, Benjamin. What should we call you?
Well, you're Ben, so I'll be Benjamin.
Okay, Benjamin.
That's how it went like a year ago when I joined the company, right?
That is true, because I am so excited that you're here. Hello, Sudipto. Sudipto says, "Hey, Ben squared." Yes, it's Ben squared. It's the Ben Hour. Okay.
Oh, no, now we're gonna have a new show called the Ben Hour.
The Ben Hour live on Vonage
Vonage Twitch as they see us watch hummus together.
Should that be the thing? So first of all, people should know that Ben and I, Ben squared, we live a few miles from each other, not so far. A few kilometers, you're right, a few kilometers from each other, and we technically work out of the same office. And technically, when I come in, I don't come in as often as you come in because Ben lives in the same city as the office. I would have to commute into the office.
When the office is open, Ben sometimes lives in the office.
It's true. Benjamin does live in the office occasionally. I live in a suburb. Benjamin lives in the city itself.
You have your own beautiful office,
which is very exciting. And yes, Kevin, this is now BenConf. That is the name of our 2021 BenConf. That's right. That's what it's all about. Okay.
You think
today is
keynote speaker? Do you think we could get Kevin to be the keynote speaker of BenConf?
Should there be a Kevin as the keynote speaker at BenConf? That would be like counterintuitive.
But we could get him to change at least his Twitter handle to Ben for the day.
Just for the day. Or we should have a Ben take over his Twitter handle for the day.
Oh, there you go.
You know how some people do that. That could be a thing, you know? Yes, Benjamin is very dedicated. Sudipto, he says that Benjamin is very dedicated. It is true. Benjamin is a very dedicated employee. He likes being in the office.
I don't know if I like being in the office.
It's a great office to be in. I don't see why you wouldn't. So if I didn't live in a suburb, I'd probably be in that office more often. But you know, it's a bit more of a commute. As anyone who has ever lived in a suburb and has commuted to a major city knows, regardless of your commuting options, a commute is still a commute, no matter what. If you have the versus doing a commute versus not doing a commute, oftentimes the what you might want to call them the better angels might prevail, and you end up not taking in that bus to the train, to the walk, to the office, back to the train, to the bus, to the walk.
Yeah, but that way you're just in time for lunch. You get your lunch, and then it's like, oh, okay, I guess it's time for me to catch the train.
That is typically the day. That is true. Okay, so we have a 3-part series. Today is Benjamin. In 2 weeks' time, at this time, in this place, at this location, we will be greeted by our colleague Paul, who is another member of the Vonage Platform Developer Experience team, who is also a Rubyist. And last but certainly not least is, I would actually call one of our Ruby extraordinaire, Fabian Rodriguez, who is also on the Platform Developer Experience team, will be our final guest in the 3-part series. So that's today, which is the 4th. I had to check what day is today because I don't know any dates anymore. Today's the 4th. On the 17th, isn't today the 4th?
3rd.
Yeah. 3rd. Today's the 3rd. I don't know anything anymore. It's like okay. March. It's like March 42nd of 2020, basically.
Well, you have no idea how much I feel that. I feel like it was just yesterday that I was coming in and you were greeting me and you're like, hey, I don't really come into the office very much, but this is it.
This is the office. This is what it looks like. The first time you started, when you first started, I came in especially for you to say hello to you. It's true.
We were learning together where the bathroom was.
Yes, because I was like my second or third time there. And then so on the 2 weeks from today will be Paul, and then 2 weeks after that, I don't trust my dates anymore, so I'm not saying the dates anymore, but 2 weeks after that will be Fabian. I want to get started. Yes, Ben. in 1 month, a whole month. It's bi-weekly, so 6 weeks of content. I want to get started by asking you to share with our wonderful community who you are. Tell us a few words about yourself. If this was an interview and I was interviewing you for a position and I said, "Hey Benjamin, welcome to my office. Can you just let's begin by can you just share something about yourself?" What would you say to that question?
Wow, what an introspective question. I'd say, hey, I'm Benjamin, formerly known as Ben. Um, as you can see by this sweet tan, I live in Tel Aviv. Moved to Tel Aviv it's coming up on 3 years, which is scary to admit. Originally from St. Louis, Missouri, in real America.
As a coastal American, originally a coastal American, it's all real America, coastal, inland, from the mighty plains and the sun-swept south.
Yeah, what other geography do you know in the middle?
I lived in the middle for a couple of years.
Where are you? Okay, anyway, it's my interview, not your interview.
Yeah, but I'm the interviewer, so I get to interrupt whenever I want. Okay, so you're from St. Louis, Missouri, and now you've moved to Tel Aviv 3 years ago.
Yeah,
When did you join Vonage?
I joined Vonage, what was it? February, something like the 16th, February 16th last year.
So we're almost at 1 year.
Yeah, coming up. It's scary. It's really like now that the dates are the same, like 1 year anniversary, really hitting me like what you said about the March 92nd, because it's like, wait, that happened a whole year ago. I feel like, yeah, I feel like I'm still living in that period. So I joined last February. Just had 1 week in the office with some onboarding. Flew to London. Met the community team and some more of the PDX team. PDX, for those listening, is what we call our developer experience and developer relations team. So met some great people out there, and then came back, and then COVID had set in, and so my whole Vonage world is a COVID world.
And what has your Vonage role? What is your role on the platform developer experience team?
So my role is online, developer community manager. So I am in charge of making sure that our content gets all of our great dev. Hello, Daniela. And yes, I can't see the chat right now. So, we got Ruby fans in the building.
Hello, Daniela. Welcome. And yes, Kevin, you did have Benjamin in his week too.
Kevin and I had a real fun. One of our onboarding missions was to travel around London and going to different music stores for equipment that I don't know if we ever bought. But it was really funny because it was for in-person events. So that was a great investment.
So, Benjamin, so your job is to manage our entire online presence. But the reason why you're with us today on this lovely hour of Ruby Power on Twitch is to discuss where your roots are, your origin story. Your origin story in this space, you have many origin stories, as we all do, but this particular origin story has a bit of a Ruby twist to it. Can you talk to me a little bit about sort of what was your Ruby origin story? Tell me some of that.
Yeah, okay. So let's just say my dev tech story starts way back. Getting a little bit of nature here in Florentine. My tech story starts in 2016. Can you hear me talk or no?
I can hear you talk, and I can hear the locals as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's a wildlife or just...
That could just be the local scenery in Florentine neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah, streetscape of Tel Aviv.
Particularly Florentine, but yes. Okay.
Yeah, Florentine is the boo-boo hipster part of town. Of a very hipster city, this is the most hipster part of town.
It's the hipster epicenter of the hipster city.
Yeah. So I started in 2016. I did a boot camp in St. Louis called Launch Code. There was no Ruby there. Started with C and PHP, and then moved into some JavaScript. And that was really great foundation to a foundation. Like I could make, some little apps. Might have to close the door here. Let me know because I can't
It's
tell.
fine. I think it's fine.
So anyway, learning C and PHP 2016 in like pre-built environments, great, right? Like when the teachers were setting everything up and I just had to like, here's a file, execute some kind of a functionality, great. Or if I could write the whole app in one file, also great.
Right.
Then I finish, the structured portion and I go out on my own for about a year after trying to build my own apps. And I realize, wait, oh crap. Like setting up an app is really confusing. Like I was like, wait, I thought I knew what a server does. What the heck is a server? And how do I configure it? And then, like every part of the front end and the back
this is
end.
after your bootcamp experience, right? You're out in the wild for the first time.
Yeah. So it was a part.
You're trying to build something, and you're like, wait, this is a bit different than the structured curriculum that I was in.
I'm like, where do I was like, I'm just used to.
Where do I put things?
I just want to do JavaScript. Like, I just want to make nice stuff in the browser look cool, right? And then
nice stuff and JavaScript oftentimes don't go hand in hand. But don't tell Kevin I said that.
And if we're coding it, often it doesn't look cool. So that was it really, that period of time really taught me the dedication involved in coding, we could say.
Right.
What made you laugh so much?
Kevin gave us the eyes for when I said JavaScript and nice stuff don't always go hand in hand. They can go hand in hand very often, obviously, but it's a bit harder in the JavaScript landscape. Shots have been fired across the bow. Okay, so you went to boot camp. Wait, Benjamin, hello, you there with us?
Yeah.
I can't. Your video froze for me at least a little bit. There we go. Okay, so you went to a boot camp. It didn't cover Ruby. When did Ruby start for you?
So then I had this experience. Things didn't really click. I stopped coding for a while. Was in the middle of opening up a bagel business in St. Louis, and then in that period, there's some life changes that happened, and I realized I wanted to make a big change and move to Israel, and specifically Tel Aviv.
And so clearly, you said to yourself, "I want to move across the world. Let me learn how to make something in Ruby on Rails."
Yes, that was
clear transition.
I had a dream, and in my dream, I was imagining this Japanese guy and this, what is he, Norwegian? What is DHH?
Scandinavian.
Okay, that's a very safe label. Scandinavian guy and a Japanese guy in Tel Aviv, and I was like, how could this all happen?
and it led you down the path to Ruby on Rails.
Yeah, so the real story is
this is like falafel on Rails.
In my previous job, we had this awesome sticker of a 3D sticker with a plate of hummus. That was one of my favorite.
Hummus on Rails.
Hummus on Rails. There we go. Hey, I hear we need new Ruby frameworks in the modern era.
There we go. We're just gonna call it hummus.
We can gather together the very strong Israeli Ruby community, and we'll call it hummus on pita.
Hummus on pita. Rails on pita. Okay, so but wait, so I still have not yet fully captured where the Ruby journey started.
Okay, so I'm come on, two Jews talking. It takes a while to get to the point.
I'm trying to get you to the point. That's what we're working on here.
So so I decided, okay, I'm moving to Tel Aviv, and then the next question is, I had been in Tel Aviv the summer before, and I knew that really the only way to earn like a living here as what we call an olim in Israel, as the local term for an immigrant, is to get into high tech, right? And so I had this bit of a developer experience, and I was like, okay, this is something I want to do again. Let me figure out a way that I can get back into it. And mainly I had a feeling Israel is the kind of place that you get a job by your network, It's not like it'd be very difficult not knowing anyone, showing up and getting a job. So I started looking at boot camps. I saw Le Wagon. Somehow I knew the name, and then it clicked with me that I had one of my best friends growing up from school. she was a journalist in New York, very accomplished, and all of a sudden she said, I want to change career paths. I think I want to try being a developer. And she did Le Wagon or Le Wagon.
So now
in
we're in a second boot camp. Now we're in
second boot
Le
camp.
Wagon, Le
Le
Wagon,
Wagon. Yeah.
Le Wagon. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so it was when you have somebody who can that and you trust can vouch for it, it made it a lot
It
easier.
makes the world a difference, right?
Yeah, so they just opened up here, and I talked to my friend. She said when she did it in Brussels, she got a job after just a couple of weeks. I was like, okay, cool, sounds great. And the curriculum in Le Wagon is Ruby and
Now we got into Ruby. We're here. The story has taken us to the beginning of the answer of the question. It's amazing.
And timeline wise, this is 2018. So I first started really trying to learn to code in 2016, and by 2018, signed up in a second boot camp. Their curriculum was Ruby Rails based, and that's where I fell in love with the Rails. To be honest, Ruby.
So let's take a detour for a second.
Yeah.
We need to address a comment here by one of our friends, OpSecMate, which said, "I thought Ruby was dead." It's a very good point to make. And Kevin responded, Ruby underpins many, many large services. It's very much not dead. So I actually published a blog post recently, not under Vonage, but personally, on the new Code Newbie community on forum.
Yeah.
I think it's community.codenewbie.org. And the blog post, so I'm also a bootcamp graduate like Benjamin.
Woo-woo.
From about, exactly, Flatiron School from several years ago. And one of the first things I learned when I started my first job was my expectation was I'd be constantly pursuing the latest and the newest all the time. Like everything was going to be the newest, iteration of this, the newest version of this, the newest language of this. And my first job was a legacy application on WAMP stack on Windows, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, using Subversion, which is an older form of version control, older than Git, not so much used anymore. And the PHP was like spaghetti code PHP 4. So everything was really old. And I was shocked that we were doing this. And ever since then, I've seen so many instances of this, that companies, corporations, organizations, they don't just switch overnight from the stack that's working for them, from the tech stack that's working for them, to the latest and newest and greatest. It's like, let's say all the companies running applications on Node are not jumping over to switch to Dino overnight if they're going to switch, right? Like, why aren't they? Because stability is battle tested. And stability provides that sense of community support, and there's a community to lean on for questions, and what to expect out of it. And those are values which are really important, which I wrote about in my blog post for Code Newbie. Is one of the things that I learned in my first year out there, was that companies tend to stick with a thing that works. And so what I've discovered, since I've been in this work as a Ruby advocate at Vonage, there's so many companies running on Ruby stacks. So many. And oftentimes it'll be like a mixed hybrid stack, right? So it'll be like Ruby maybe back end, and then something like, let's say, JavaScript front end, or even like multi-stack, depending on which application or microservices. So there could be something like on Python, something on Ruby, something running with PHP, clearly some client-side JavaScript, etc. So like our developer portal, developer.vonage.com, it runs with Vue.js in the front end, a lot of Vue.js custom components, and Rails in the back end. And that works really customized, configured Rails, but like it works really well for us. So the long answer to that is it's not dead. I would actually probably argue there's no language that's fully dead. And not only is Ruby not even the category of like languages which are not dead, but like GitHub is run on Rails, right? So yeah.
If you want me to add my 2 cents,
I always do. Always.
I also wrote like kind of a long-winded post back in 2018, and just I think the underpinnings of all of it are still the same. And my main points were. So we kind of stopped with me joining the bootcamp, but the main thing was Ruby and Rails really let me, in a way that my experience of learning other languages and frameworks, because it's so intuitive, and because Rails especially does so much of the out of the box for you, it's it's like, for me, it's just so great for beginners that they can jump in and they can feel comfortable doing that part of code. And then you start to learn, okay, the more that you get comfortable actually handling your Rails project, the more you can start to configure things. You start to understand, hey, for so long I was stuck on getting a server up and running before I learned like Ruby and Rails. And then, just to have it running. And then I realized, okay, now I can go in and look at this code and kind of see how does it work and how can I manipulate it. And then the next project around, it made it so easy. Okay, yeah. Then when I went off and learned Node of starting up a Node server, it's like, oh, well, yeah, okay, this is this part and this is this part. And I know it because I've seen it a little bit different, but more or less it's going to be the same thing.
I love that. That's such a great approach. And it's funny because in Flatiron School, when I was in boot camp, we did the exact opposite. And I don't know which one is, I don't think anyone is better, but the approach that Flatiron School took was like they started off building the most basic, everything was, you had to build it yourself. And then slowly but surely they introduced the abstractions. So I remember the first framework we got introduced to after we built out, like when it came to everything, like even iterators, like we had to build out our own each method, right? And our own map methods. And then by the way, here's each. What?
I mean,
we did the
same thing. Of course, like no, that makes sense. But I'm saying when we got to when we got to the final projects, it's like, okay, without jumping too far ahead, but there's so much Ruby and so much Rails magic that it's like, when you start out, you don't need to know how each thing works. You don't need to really, you just need to know that it works, get comfortable using it. And then like, there's a quote in there from my, it was my main teacher of the boot camp. And this guy, genius, genius programmer, genius. He's like super spiritual, he learned, so he was a Ruby developer before Rails existed. He was one of those guys. He learned Ruby when he was like 11 years old or something. And then made so much money, from what I remember, never went to university or anything, just spent his whole life traveling the world and programming and doing the whole digital nomad thing. And he made the best point. He said, look, only developers think that like the best way to learn something is by jumping to the PhD level curriculum, right? And in what other field do we ever say, oh yeah, well, addition is so 1200 BC, right? So we should never. So addition is dead. Yeah, like you should just jump straight to calculus, right? And so he would always say like, yeah, okay, you can say like Ruby or Rails are quote unquote dead, and then so we should all be brain fuck developers. Like I don't know if you know this language, but it's like each line is, I don't know, maybe 10 characters long, and the whole program might be like 3 lines long. And it's like so esoteric that there's excuse my French also, but that's the name of the language. And it made like a really great point to me of realizing it's programming is like anything else. You have to build it up. And so why would you want, like, people seem to thrive on the fact that like Ruby is too simple, Rails is too easy, it does too much for you. So again, it's like you said, it's about the purpose. And one thing is, so I was recently speaking to somebody who works at a big startup here in Tel Aviv. They have a lot of money. Like they've had a huge money rounds of investment. They have, I think, 600 or 700 employees now. For everyone listening outside of Israel, in Israel they still call that a startup. It's like a branding PR stupid thing. But they said, yeah, look, because I was asking them, oh yeah, don't you guys use Ruby? And they said, well, all of kind of the new stuff we do in microservers services in Node, and this was somebody pretty high up in the organization. They said, I don't see any way that we're ever going to leave our Ruby monolith, because just everything's built on top of it, right? So that company is booming. Like they're adding tens or hundreds of employees I think they've only been around maybe 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with companies that when I'm traveling, when we used to travel for work, when that used to be a thing, and meet companies and around the world, and you would often hear the same kind of thing. Oh yeah, the main core stuff is built on Ruby. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. It's just, and we're not going to migrate off of that. Yeah, some of our newer client-side stuff, or this microservice, that microservice built with whatever. But oh yeah, the main stuff is built. It's a Ruby on Rails app, or just vanilla Ruby or whatever. Yeah.
And this is the one thing that I will say. Like anything else, right? The language or the framework really depends on the use case, but like pro and con use case, right? Why you might want to use or learn Ruby versus why you might not want to. Pro is so in Le Wagon, like it was very much focused on it was like learn programming to start a startup, right? It was they spent a lot of time focusing also on like product management and building like a good product, not just learning to code. So Ruby and Rails is like really great, right? For let's do something fast, and it's like very business driven in that way.
Quick to iterate, quick to start up.
Yeah, exactly. Very easy to get started. Very easy to make changes. Was
there something you worked on that was built on Ruby or Ruby on Rails that either at Vonage as sort of either like a demo app you worked on, or outside of Vonage context, just in your own life, was there something you had played with that you were excited about?
Yeah. 1 second. I'm sorry. The guy who's I'm co-working with is talking a little bit. So there's a few projects that I'm really proud about. 1 second. I'm sorry.
I hope he doesn't say anything that's copyright or intellectually protected, because this will be forever maintained in a public domain.
But
seriously, Benjamin, Sudipto's right. Don't worry about it. The noise in the back is pretty minimal.
Okay, cool. Because he just has a very bravado voice. So I have a few projects that I'm pretty proud of. So one, right before I started Vonage, I started with a couple of teachers that I was working with in Le Wagon. We started working on this startup called, we're calling it Amir. We named it after a friend of ours, but that was always a working title. But basically, we were working on an app. It was actually, okay, I totally forgot the origin story. It was my final project for Le Wagon. It was, I got this brainstorm of idea. There was a lot of pressure on us from the bootcamp managers to like come up with something really creative, really innovative, something that could go on to be a real product, right? They were telling us that all these news reporters from the Israel market were going to come, and there would be investors in the crowd, and I think there maybe were a few. So they were really pushing us, like, don't just make a marketplace for shoes or something. And I was inspired in my time when I first moved to Israel. I didn't have any friends. I didn't really know anyone. And I saw this posting on Facebook. And in Israel, this was a big cultural shock that everyone, even in 2018, even more so now, that people still use Facebook like it's, 2012. So there was a posting, someone saying, hey, do you want to meet new people? Do you want to go out? Do you want to make a little bit of money? Like, you can help guide these bar crawls, right? So I was like, okay, cool. Nice way to get out, figure out where the good bars are. So I start doing these bar crawls, and I see how the organizer, she would run around and she would have to gather a bunch of people each time. She wanted to move locations and go up to each one individually because, it's kind of a one-off interaction.
Right.
It's let's gather everyone off.
Labor-intensive activity.
Exactly. And like figuring out who's here and where are they. And, she would run around.
So did you disrupt that whole field?
Well, so this led us to we had a religious guy in our group, and we couldn't convince him enough to go with the pub crawl idea, but we saw that there was an easy pivot to like school groups and to tourism, right? And to tour guides. Tour guides also, they need to manage a group and let everybody know.
Yeah.
Stop and it's a lot of manual. Okay, we're all waiting for, Bob got lost in the bathroom.
Right.
We have no way of and when they're tourists, they might not have you might not have their number, they might not have reception or whatever. So we're like, okay, great. This is a place where like a little app could be really helpful.
So how did you address that?
So we built out this Rails app called Amir, and basically it let organizers like group tour guides organize, groups, and then every time we would move, like it was time to move, like locations, people would get a notification. It would track for the tour guide. It would track
How would
wherever.
they get the notification? Was it a push notification?
So that's the thing, is because we were just like 2.5 months into developing, well, at least on Ruby and Rails. It was all browser based at the time, but like the goal was to then develop it into a mobile app with push notifications and make it, and then also to be able to track the location, because with a browser the only way you can track it is if the user actually, when they open the browser, right?
But then they also need geolocation services on, or things
Yeah,
like that. Right.
there were a lot of little technical problems, but just for pure proof, like what we built out was pretty nice. We got most of the features done, and we could show where it was headed. So
That's
then,
really cool.
yeah, it was really awesome. It had a great pitch. I remember brought down the house, and then and was thinking, oh wow, we're gonna make it. And then so left it alone for a while, and then right last year, right before I joined Vonage, and I had a few weeks, or when I was searching for a job, I was like, let me spin this project back up, and I got a new team, a little bit more capable developers, and we were really going at it. We totally destroyed it. We went with a whole new design, rethought and rebuilt all the features, and we were starting to build, and then we all started getting jobs, and then COVID happened, and we were all like, this is probably not the best time to work on a tourism app.
Right.
So that's been shelved, but it was I'm very proud of that app, and that what we realized that we could do in 2 weeks. And this was the wild thing, was that in 2 weeks, the first week of it, we spent building something. We went about it totally wrong, as far as the DevOps, as far as everything. We wasted 5 days of our lives. And then I went into the office that weekend. The other two guys were religious, and so they weren't going to work on the weekend. I was like, wow, we have 1 week to present something. Went back to the drawing board, did my Rails new, and then single-handedly in like a day and a half was able to rebuild everything we had built, but build it in actually like the correct way, right? Like with clean code, reusable code. That and then the next 4 days we built out like the more interesting features. So that was really cool. That was a fun project.
That's amazing. That's a great story. And it seems like even when you went back to rebuild it again, you landed back in that old familiar like command that we all love, Rails new, right? And so it's like you came back to that home. And I'm curious, like, what about, okay, so there's two questions here. One is the framework Rails, right? The other one is the language Ruby. So what about, let's start with the last one first. What about the language really kind of attracts you? What about it like makes it easier, more fun, more engaging for you to develop with? What are the things you like in it?
Like this is probably the reason why it's I never got to the con about why you should learn Ruby, but I will say very much the pro is that when you're starting out, when I was learning, for instance, C or PHP, I really felt like, oh wow, the syntax, I was struggling like that. I would have to almost like try and memorize like I was in school, right? And in Rails, it's like you just whatever you imagine it can
Well, let's
do.
bracket Rails again for a second. Just the
Sorry, not
language.
Ruby,
Right.
Ruby, right? Like whatever you want. Like once you kind of master the mindset of developing, of coding, right? When you want to write some functionality, it's like you just write it in English almost, and you can just like almost guess. More often than not, you can guess the function, the method that you need. And
So it's like that, like it's that readability of the code, that almost like it's almost like English in the sense.
I mean, this is when I was skipping a little bit further into my career, but when I was teaching in the boot camp, I was such a stickler for people learning, or whenever, not even when they were a bit more experienced and trying to do something difficult, and I could like figure out what was the problem, and then what I would be a stickler about was, okay, let's do some pseudocode, and then the pseudocode is great, and then literally you're going, once you write pseudocode, the next line of the actual code in Ruby is more or less basically the exact same thing, just with a dot or like a block or something, and yeah, it's like you write the pseudocode and then you just rewrite the pseudocode. It's great.
That's amazing.
anyone can come and read your code, and it's like, I get what this does, right? There's no guessing. What is this variable doing here?
It's almost like when I'm reviewing Ruby code, one of the first things that pops out to me is if I can't fully understand what I'm reading on a 1 or 2 take, that pops out. And it's like, well, why can't I understand it? If it's so complicated, I can't understand it. Is it really like good
Right.
Ruby? Because it should be easy to understand.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, also Ruby at this point, like the community of Ruby is so great to enforce stuff like that. Like that, hey, you're not going to score extra points for doing like a x dot x, dot each y dot, like it's okay. Save the time. We don't need a break. Like your computer can handle it. Write out actually like well named variable names. Like make things make sense.
Right. And Sudipto makes a good point, which is people say the same thing about Python, and they do. And I think in so many ways, the Python and Ruby communities, I'm sure what you think as well, like they look very similar in many ways. They do differ in some big ways, but like as far as readability goes, they're both very readable codes.
So that brings me to the con that I never got to about why not to.
Right. So wait, you're preempting my question. So let me first ask the question, and then you can answer the question. Because then we can even cut this out as a clip at one point. Benjamin's con on learning Ruby, and it'll be like a 2-minute clip. What don't you like about Ruby? So that's what you like. What don't you like?
So this is the thing. It's nothing inherent in the language itself. It's more about trying to start out, not even me personally, more about people that I've helped, trying to start a career with Ruby in this day and age. You really have to know your market. And so if you're learning to code to build like a startup, Ruby is great. If you're learning to code and you're, for instance, in the US or in Europe, Ruby is great. If you're learning to code and you're in Israel, Ruby might not be that great. If you don't realize that that experience that you had where, oh yeah, I never touched all of these ancient technologies, but like you can code, so we'll give you a chance, right? That doesn't apply to all markets. And some markets, people really want you. They don't want to have to spend the time to wait for you to train.
So it's almost like what you're raising is sort of the practical geographic limitations of the markets in the where you live, and where we happen to live is saturated with startups, right? And startups tend to like have new infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Would that be fair to say? Like most startups are starting up fresh, right? They don't have legacy code bases.
right. And over the years, like all of the like improvements that, okay, I'm just gonna say, I know we're still trying to focus on Ruby, but that Rails, like, all like so much that why Rails is so great for startups, other languages and frameworks have taken those benefits, right? So in a place like Israel, where it's saturated, as you said, and where most of the Ruby jobs are going to be for mid or senior level developers, I still see a crap ton of senior level Ruby positions. I just don't.
Yeah, there's tons.
You just see junior positions.
Right. Right.
And there's that, that's just I think that's a problem of the industry everywhere.
Can I ask you differently? Is there something in the language itself that would be something that like is a detractor for you? Is there something challenges to the language beyond the marketability of it and the job attractiveness?
I think no. I mean, look, like every Rubyist, especially because I think everybody has that, even outside of Rubyist, right? Like everybody has their language, their framework where everything finally clicks.
Right. Right.
And whatever that language is for you, you're going to be
naturally attracted to it. You're going to gravitate towards it.
It's like your first love, right? It's your first kiss, your first romance. It's
Benjamin, you keep on taking us down these paths we don't normally go down with your metaphors, but yes, it's your first experience.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there's still something magic about it, right? And so I have a hard time saying something bad about Ruby because for me it's so good for such a specific, like, especially when you think about it as a specific use case. Great. I don't know that I would want it necessarily as a, Yeah, I don't know. I was gonna start bringing up just the, like, I mean, it's a trend, and trends in programming. They always they seem to come around and go around. Just that it doesn't, the strong typing isn't built in, and performance
Well,
wise.
now it is in Ruby 3.
Okay, so I was very excited to come with you today because I haven't been keeping up with Ruby so much lately as I should. And somebody just asked me a really funny question. I got a WhatsApp notification. How does the rabbi make a coffee? So Ben Greenberg, how do you make your coffee?
I make my coffee as a coffee detour, because we often do detour into coffee on these conversations. This coffee today is, again, as always, not a Starbucks coffee. It's a Starbucks cup, because it's the only size that I like, and you can't find this in outside the States, that size. This coffee today is a cold brew cardamom spiced coffee. So it's cardamom and cold brew coffee. This afternoon. This morning, I had a hazelnut flavored Nespresso, and this afternoon we are now in cardamom, because I find cardamon's a good afternoon spice for a coffee.
You are really bringing the Olim to the coffee game. And, I was going to say that just before this, I was having a cafe shahor.
Black coffee, right?
Yeah, so Israeli version of a Turkish coffee.
Right.
Explain it.
Yeah. This coffee, my friend, comes from a Tel Aviv startup, actually, which does deliveries out around the center of the country from two American immigrants. Okay.
I can't see Sudipto's.
Yeah, Sudipto. So that goes back to our regional questions or regional conversations. Each region is really different. So in his region, startups go with the latest framework. So bigger players have code bases like Java and .NET, and but also different regions have different portions of startups. So some regions are much more about enterprise jobs, and other regions are much more about startup jobs. It's 100% true. And Avital, first of all, hello, nice to see you. Second of all, I do drink coffee like a local. There are many ways to drink coffee. There are many forms of locals, but it is really nice to see you.
All our friends are here.
I know, it makes me so happy. I had another question for you, which is Avital says pumpkin spice cafe shachor. No, not pumpkin spice cafe shachor. God forbid. This is cardamom cold brew I'm drinking, and Benjamin had cafe shachor, had black coffee earlier with no spice, right? There was no spice in your cafe shachor. It was just,
you don't put anything. You put hot water. You let.
If you're gonna do cafe shachor, you're just drinking cafe shachor black. You were just drinking it.
So when I first came to Israel, before I moved here, actually, and people gave me cafe shachor, and they didn't give it to me. That's the thing. I just saw it, like on a breakfast, in a crappy motel. You have the kettle, and you have you have Nescafe, the instant coffee, and then you have cafe shachor. So I put in the cafe shachor, put in some water, and like normal, put in some milk. And can I tell you how disgusting that was? Such a bad move. That's like, for years I thought I hated it. Just realized that I was drinking it wrong.
Because of the cafe shachor?
Because of the milk.
You put in milk.
Yeah, it's not it's illegal.
There's actually a group from like the 90s in Israel that was called Cafe Shachor, I think, a rap group. Cafe Shachor Chazak. That was what the rap group was called. Strong black coffee. I thought you
were gonna bust some tunes.
I was gonna bust out some tunes. Let's see if I can find one.
Because for everyone who wasn't here in the countdown to the stream, there were some deep cuts. What was that? Who was that rapper who was rapping about? Wow, I need that one.
That's Cafe Shachor Chazak. Black coffee. Yeled Gevel.
Yeled is what? Child man?
Yeled Gevel, Ken. Boy man, I guess would be the translation.
Wow,
okay, so I had a question for you as well, Ben. If we can, as we're getting near the end of our time together, we're not yet there, but we're getting closer.
Wow, are we at a firm 1 hour?
We talked. Well, what can I say? We talked about Ruby, right? We talked about we talked about so many things, but we talked a lot about Ruby. We talked about what you like. We talked about startups. Sort of that was a big gravitational pull for you.
Yeah.
Since you've been at Vonage, I know firsthand because I've seen it. You have built some sample applications. You built one. You were working on one with Avital, who joined us a few months ago. You're working on a couple others in different languages, not only Ruby.
Yeah.
And you had experience from PHP and learning C and all the other kind of stuff. Are there things from other languages, whether PHP or C or Python, or let's actually add frameworks too, like Node, and I don't know if you play with Django or any of those stuff. Are the things that you like from somewhere else that you would say, that'd be really great if that was in the Ruby ecosystem? Like, if only I could have that. Was there ever a moment like that for you?
I mean, at the end of the day, this is why I don't know. I was trying kind of before this job started. Was trying to dive deeper into Node. Was because
so why were you diving deeper into Node, just as an aside? Because of the marketability?
A little bit, just because honestly this is my main point, is that being able to run, like, for me, the I guess worst parts always with Ruby or with Rails is getting the front end to talk to the back end, like getting to pull something.
That's because you're separating the front and the back end, right? Because you're using like JavaScript in the front end or something.
Yeah, right. Whether you're using some kind of JavaScript to get some kind of information, you're doing some manipulation maybe.
Right.
And then
if it's just like static Ruby, ERB syntax, whatever, it's fine. But the second you start trying to like put in fancy schmancy JavaScript, you start running into
fancy JavaScript. It's the, how do I get that information? Like getting some sort of information and then sending it back.
Like, how do you pass that back to the back end?
Yeah, and a lot of times, like the Rails conventions, it was kind of, it was like sometimes, a lot of times, it felt like fitting a square peg into a round hole a bit, right? Like right. Really, yeah, like it's not, unless, yeah, it's just difficult sometimes. And that was why I was like, okay, this makes sense that like Node is the way the world's going. You have JavaScript in the front, JavaScript in the back, and it's pretty easy to get them to talk, I guess. And so that's the one thing is, like the whole beauty of Rails, right, is that you don't have to like out of the gate, you don't have to build a front and a back. It's like all in one, except it's not.
Though it's all in one. It's really all in one when it's kind of in the one language. It gets more complicated. And so actually I have a lot to say about this because, there's different ways to manage those assets that are in JavaScript, right? So the asset pipeline in Rails versus Webpack, right? And Webpack is the latest and greatest, but it's also the biggest headache one can possibly have. And it's like, and it's a headache for a reason, because you're trying to like manage two different language ecosystems in one language framework, and it's really complicated. Hey, Benjamin's friend. Right. And so Webpack, and it's just complicated, and the Ruby Rails versioning of it with Webpacker helps a little bit, but it's still like a really like complex thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like for all of the magic of out of the box getting going, it's great. It's like, if you don't need to know a lot of Ruby or even a lot of Rails to get up and running and to really feel like, okay, you can deliver, I don't know, 70% of apps that are out there. You could build really fast, right? Because it's how much really unique functionality do you need to build? But then in those cases where you do have something that doesn't really follow the Rails pattern, it becomes complicated. And I know that, and this is I feel a little bit, I don't know, guilty or whatever, but the last year I haven't really been keeping up, and especially with the new, like, for instance, like the Stimulus JS, I've heard amazing things about it, right? And that it's supposed to be also super easy right now to integrate like your Ruby with your React and things.
And if you follow along with DHH, right, you shouldn't be doing any of these things. It's all over the wire, right? It's all HTML over the wire with turbo links and basically tiny bits of JS when you mean you absolutely need it, but everything's just standard Ruby with HTML, and that's how he built essentially, hey, the new email service,
Right.
and Basecamp is built like that, and other things like that. So it's
But
interesting. I do want to take one quick detour because
yeah,
Sudipto asked a good question, and I want to get to it. Sudipto asked, Webpacker versus Assets Pipeline. Can one of you explain? Do you want to take a gamble at that, or should I?
you should. You're
You
you're more fresher on the.
Well, because I've banged my head against the wall on this enough recently.
So
Okay,
see,
Sudipto, in very short terms, what is the difference? They both do the exact same thing in the big picture, which is you have assets, and by assets, what we mean is like JavaScript, images, CSS style sheets, right? Like it could be other things, but those are your three big like sort of boxes, right? JavaScript, CSS, and images. The assets pipeline, sprockets, as it's called, is like the classic Rails way of managing those assets. You have an assets manifest file in your Rails application where you list the things you want to require, and they get required in there. They're stored in a certain file structure, and that's kind of it. That works. Webpacker is a way of using Webpack, which is from a different world, right? It's from JS. Webpack is not a Rails thing. Webpacker is the Rails Rails instrumentation of Webpack, right? But like Webpack is itself like a JS thing. Webpack is about pre-compilation. One thing it does is it pre-compiles those assets for you, so they load faster. A lot more hot reloading. So if you change a JS file with Webpack, it'll hot reload it for you, so you don't have to like restart the server, your Rails server. And the third thing, and this is perhaps a really important thing with larger code bases or more complex code bases, is it allows you to modularize your assets a lot better. So with the assets pipeline with sprockets, it was really hard to say, I only want this asset for this one view, or this asset for only this one thing. I would have to load all my assets in the application initialization time, and they were all loaded at once. With Webpack, I can say I only want this asset for this thing, and this asset for this one view, and nothing else. And it will only get loaded and get compiled in advance, but only get loaded for that one view. And so you can actually manage your dependencies, your asset dependencies like JavaScript, style sheets, and images a lot faster, so you can actually have faster runtime and faster load time for your web pages. So that's like in essence what it is. But where the asset pipeline for Rails does for years, the asset pipeline really meant you didn't really need to know a lot of JS on your own, because you could import something and just one line in your manifest file, and that was it. With Webpack, you have to know a lot about like import module statements and splitting chunks and like all other weird ES. I don't know what version of JavaScript they're on now. ES 3000, ES 8, ES 7. I don't even know. ES 6, ES 6 syntax. You have to know all these like interesting like import statements in JavaScript, and it's a lot of like more involved to do Webpack. The benefits are there. They're clear. The benefits are definitely there, but the headache has risen. And because it's relatively new, and this is the last thing, because it's relatively new, there isn't a really good Rails way yet to do Webpack. It's not as easy as Rails new. It's not as like intuitive as Rails generate model. And so it's a lot more of it doesn't feel very Rails like to do Webpack because it's not really fully integrated yet. Even the docs on the Rails documentation site are lacking when it comes to Webpack. Like it's all kind of like emerging. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I hope that's helpful, Sudipto, if that made sense. There's a lot more there. But that's like sort of like just a 30-second thing. Benjamin.
That's
I think. Yeah. Okay, Benjamin. I want to ask you one more question, which is a good question, I think. If you could build something new today, if you were starting off a new Rails project today, what are you interested in? Like, what would be fun for you to do right now? Bonus points if it's related to the Vonage APIs.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there is a side project that I've been working on with my roommate, and it's like it's nothing fun. It's like it's based on a Tel Aviv real need. It's like a real like a
The best projects are based on real needs.
Yeah, but it's not okay. Actually, I do have a fun.
Luke wants you to manage stream episode data. He wants you to build an app for that. Luke is here, by the way. Say hi to Luke. And he wants you to manage stream episode data. So build that app. But we digress. What is your idea that addresses your real needs?
You know that I was very happy to build that app. I just don't know Netlify.
He'll teach you gladly. He's written a blog post about it. Luke is our Netlify expert.
So if I could just build like a little, Rails microservice.
There you go.
No, there was I kind of built a half version of it for the Oliman Tech hackathon in about a little over a year ago. But
Sudipto wants to integrate the reports API. I'm adding feedback as they come.
So okay, so let me cancel the rest of my plans for the year. No, there was a fun little idea that I had. That was half built, and it was basically, like with the scooter charging, right? Like the whole decentralized idea of how to, that they got people, and it works. Like people go and find these scooters that are out of battery. They take them home.
They do, yeah.
Right? It's kind of wild, right? I remember when I first saw that a couple of summers ago, I started thinking like, in Israel, for instance, especially here, because it was when you're fresh, new, like I was noticing so many idiosyncrasies, you could say, about the culture that now I forget, I just take it for granted. Like
I just have to offer this moment and framing here, just in case anyone's curious. Daniela has already laid claim to Benjamin, and he's already working with her on their billionaire app idea, as she says. So if you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, I want to hire Benjamin, it's too late. Daniela's already claimed him to work on the billionaire app idea together. Don't worry, Daniela, we're not going to take him away from you. You can work on the billionaire app idea together.
Yeah, too many billionaire app ideas. No, but anyway, so the fun thing, like the fun project was to do a open source, kind of almost like a charity app, but trying to do for decentralizing recycling for a place.
That's like a great idea. Yeah.
Like in Israel, where it's impossible to find out where, who, and like if you even put the recycling in the place it's supposed to go, I'm 99% sure they just take it out to the dump anyway. And like, and like in Israel, you already have a built-in thing where you can bring, I don't know up to how many bottles a day, but you can bring a certain amount of bottles to like a grocery store and they'll give you money for it, right? And this happens in a lot of countries,
right?
But basically, it's building an app where it would be, hey, Mark, like, hey, I have X amount of recycling, come pick it up, and then the app would just tell you where you can go to. Like, there's a lot of small features you could build out, but at the very basic,
it's a very nice idea. And I hear some great integrations with the Vonage APIs as well. Really good integrations there.
Calls, messaging,
WhatsApp Messenger bot, Facebook Messenger.
You could video chat so that the person knows that you're actually delivering their.
You could video chat with the sanitation worker to make sure they come and pick it up. You could. It really just.
And I mean, I don't want just anyone coming to pick up my recycling. I need
endless.
I need 2FA to make sure that it's.
You need to use the Verify API to make sure it's really the actual sanitation worker picking up your recycling. It is true. Benjamin, this has been so much fun. Once again, this is Benjamin Aronov, a member of our platform developer experience team, part of our Vonage Rubyists. This is part 1 of Meet the Vonage Rubyists. Next time, we'll be joined by Paul, another member of our Vonage platform developer experience team, another Vonage Rubyist, for another amazing hour of Meet the Vonage Rubyists. That's in 2 weeks' time, same place. I want to end the way we started in the middle, which is another song from Cafe Shachor, from Black Coffee, the rap group from the 90s. This song is called Yeh Beseder, which means it'll be okay. And so it will be okay. We hope so. We don't know exactly how, but it will be okay. So I bring you Yeh Beseder.
Sing it! שהכל יהיה בסדר, לא משנה מה כולם מדברים בסתר, ניתן בראש בעזרת השם מנדר. בסדר, לא מקשיב למי שמדבר בלי קשר, חושב מחוץ אל הקופסה וגם מעבר, אמת מקי יורק עד הקבר, לא מתערבב, לא משחק במשחקים, לא קונה אלף חיוכים, עסוק בעצמי, לא תובע בצרכים של נחשים שמנסים למשוך בחוטים, בבילן בזיין, עכבר מול עין, בחיפוש אחר האושר, לא מחפש להיות המעליין, בום שקלק, קפה שחור חזק, עם הנץ' הכי שחור במשחק, צ'ולו הסנדק, סול משאיר אבק, מרימים את הראש, צופים למרחק, אני יודע שהכל יהיה בסדר, לא משנה מה כולם מדברים בסתר, ניתן בראש בעזרת השם בלי נדר, אני יודע שהכל יהיה סבבה, ניתן את הלב והנשמה, נביא את הסוואגה, לא נוותר, רק נרים את הראש למעלה. חויה לא ויתרתי מעולם, גם בזמנים קשים אני נלחם, תמיד חם, רק